My name's Starsky and welcome to From the Studio on Clubbing TV. And today I'm going to be taking a look at what is considered by many of us to be the cracker cane of music production, modular synths. And in this episode I'm going to be looking at the very basics, from what they are, why they're so popular, and why do we see them all over the place. And no, I've not completely lost the plot. I do realise this isn't a modular synth, but I've got it out to explain the basics. So here we have the Arturia Minibrute. It's a standard synth, and as with every other synth, it's made of a number of basic building blocks, each of which affects the sounds in different ways. Here we've got the oscillator, and that produces the sort of basic tones, and we've got a sawtooth, square, triangle, and we've got noise, audio in, and a sub. So the oscillator sounds go through the mixer, and then they're sort of affected by the filter, and these are all sort of standard things here with every synth. And then we've got two envelopes here, and then we've got the LFO section down here, but you get the general idea. Basic building blocks on every synth. So this is a really sort of full-featured little synth that can do a whole array of different sounds, but I'm showing it here to demonstrate the building blocks that you have, which are the oscillator, a mixer, a filter, envelopes, and an LFO. And you have these on pretty much, or if not, every single synth. And you can see on the panel that these are laid out in sort of really simple sections, and they're even labels to make it really easy for us to know what's going on, really easy to follow. So here's another, this is the Moog Grandmother, and this has got exactly the same functions. It's got the oscillator section here, we've got the mixer, we've got a filter, we've got an envelope, and we've got an LFO. And they're much more clearly laid out on this in these, what would you call them, really attractive colours. Not to everyone's liking, but I quite like it myself. But again, it's got the same sections, and each of these sections is based on the modules you'd find on the really old, huge, original modular synths that were first built back in the 60s, as they're the basic building blocks of a synth, and it just sort of stuck, and it's a great way of helping you find your way around pretty much every synth. But in these synths, we've got a fixed architecture internally. We've got a signal flow from one of the modules to the other. So in this, we get from the oscillator to the mixer, from the mixer to the filter, and that's controlled by the envelope and controlled by the LFO as well. And then it goes through an amplifier through the output. And you might have seen my episode on semi-modulars, where you can override the standard signal flow in this instrument by patching in cables through these patch points here. So you can do things like you can modulate one oscillator with another. So let's have a quick go at doing something like that on this. So start off with a really simple tone, just oscillator 2 on a simple sawtooth. Now let's modulate oscillator 2 with oscillator 1. So we take the wave out of oscillator 1, stick it through an attenuator, and then we take the output of the attenuator and put it into the pitch in of oscillator 2. So now we've sort of overridden the sort of standard architecture, the standard wiring of this, and it's bringing us more into modular territory where you can pretty much modulate anything with almost anything. So let's take a look at a modular synth now. And here we have a modular synth, looking pretty empty at the minute, isn't it? And that's because you can build your own modular synth. You build the basics from all the thousands of different modules that are available. There's like hundreds of different oscillators, hundreds of envelopes, hundreds of LFOs. And the beauty, or the real danger of modular, is that you can pick whatever you want to make your own individual synth that works in the way you want it to, which often seems to lead to what can only be described as addictive behavior, where you start with something small like this, and you think you can control the habit, and only buying one unit every now and then that builds and builds until you end up in an uncontrolled spiral, scoring module after module and end up in debt. You've sold your house to buy a garage full of modules. Really scary stuff. So beware of this. It's a really dangerous habit. So here I have some of the main building blocks, or my basic building blocks. I have the oscillator, envelope, I've got a filter, and I've got an amplifier. I've also got an LFO. So really what I've got here is the basics of a small monosynth. So let's take a look at powering it up, plugging it in and getting some sounds out of it. So I'm going to use the Grandmother to control this, and I'm going to have to patch it all together now to make some sounds, and I've got my little box of patch cables at the ready. So there's no audio coming out of this at all. This is just going to be used to tell this what to play. So firstly, I'll take the output from the keyboard here and put it into the oscillator, so it'll tell it what note to play. I'll now need to tell the envelopes when to trigger, so we use the gate out from the keyboard on there and put that into the envelope input. And that's called the gate output, and essentially it sends a signal to anything really to let it know that an event's happened, so that now when I hit a note on this, this knows that it needs to play. So we can see it triggering here. And we want the envelope to trigger the amplifier and the filter, so like a really basic little synth with only one envelope, which is what it is. So we need to take a signal from this, the output from this, and split it into two. And I'm going to use what's called a mult that we've got on the Grandmother on these utilities. So you can have one signal going in, 3 signals coming out, or 3 signals going in, 1 going out. You know, basically it mixes the signals. So let's do that. So take the envelope out, put it into the mult, and then take one of those out and put it into the input of the VCF, and then take the other out and put it into the input of the amp. And we can see as I press a key now, this is lighting up. But of course we can't hear anything yet because we're not taking any sound from the oscillator. So we take the out from the oscillator and we put it to the in of the filter. And now let's take the signal from the filter and put it into the amplifier. Out from the low pass, put that in. And we still can't hear anything because we've not anything coming out of the amplifier. So I'm going to plug the amplifier into my audio interface. So here we go, all plumbed in, all wired up for a really simple little synth. There's quite a lot of setup going on there. So let's have a listen. We've got our main oscillator here. And we've got a sub oscillator as well. Let's put them together. Get some really nice beefy tones out of that, aren't I? With just this single oscillator. I'm quite impressed by that. And that's just playing around with the wavetables. If we just take a listen to the sort of different tones we can get from this. Let's turn that sub off for a minute. And what I was doing there is modulating that with the LFO. Let's plug that back in again. It gives us some dirt. So really nice big fat. I'm really impressed with that actually. Didn't think it was going to sound that juicy, but you know, it's a very simple setup, and you know, Modular's not about simple setups. It's about doing stuff that you can't do on your other synths. It's about getting a little bit more complex. So let's take a look at adding a few more modules, shall we? To me, one of the greatest things about Modular is the amount of types of different sequences you can buy. Most synth sequences, like this one, are pretty straightforward. You play a few notes and it can repeat them. But there are a load of weird and wonderful sequences you can get for Modulars. All sorts of sliders and knobs and flashing lights. They look pretty amazing, and combining different modules in the system. But I'm not going to get that complex today, primarily because I can't, because I haven't got all those sorts of modules. But I have here one. It's called a fractal sequencer by Qubit. It's called the Bloom. It does some really pretty cool things, this. And then I'm going to add to that these effects, which is based on Mutable Instruments clouds. And apparently this is a granular audio processor like no others. Yes, Clouds really is a granular processor, quite like no other. It's focused on the real-time granularization of incoming audio signals and their transformation into amorphous textures. Grains of adjustable size, pitch and envelope are extracted at controllable time offsets from the input signal. Grains are then seeded randomly and periodically or whenever the module receives a trigger. It really is most fascinating. So now we know, but let's try and make something putting these two in, shall we? So here we go. It's only taken me about half an hour to get anything useful out of this because I don't know what any of these knobs do. I don't know what any of these knobs do. I don't know what these inputs do, and I don't know what any of these sliders do. So just a bit of sort of playing about and tweaking around, but you know, within 20 minutes, half an hour, I've got something that I can't do on my other synths. So let's have a listen. Don't judge me too harshly. So not bad, I quite enjoyed making that, considering I don't know what's going on. And it's something that I really don't know how I'd even start to make something like that in my DAW. So it's really good fun, but is it for you? Let's look at how much this has all cost so far. So it's about £300 for the case, about $280 for the oscillator, $160 for the filter, $115 for the envelope, $140 I think it was for the amplifier, I think it was $235 for the bloom, and about $180 for the monsoon. So, and we got the LFO in there as well, I think that was about $80. So all in all, we're looking at sort of well into £1,500 here for a sort of a mono synth with a little sequencer. And you know, so it's a lot of money. We're in Moog matriarch territory here, and it's nowhere near complete yet. I reckon it'll be at least £3,000 in the hole before this is finished. But the plan is that I'll have this amazing sound tool that'll create unique tones for me. So the jury's still out. And I'll let you know in a few months how I got on. But if you're strapped for cash, it's definitely a no-go. But there is software versions. There's I think it's called the VCV, which is absolutely free. And that's my recommendation for anyone looking at modular. Have a play with that first and see if it scratches your itch. It's the gateway drug that can lead to a much more expensive habit. Well, if you enjoyed watching this, don't forget you can catch it whenever you like on Clubbing TV's YouTube channel on our From the Studio playlist. And if you're seriously looking at modular, take a trip over to my Starsky Carr YouTube channel where I've put together some tips on buying modular, including like a step-by-step guide. So, I'll see you in the next episode of From the Studio.